Okay. So yeah, back with more of these. Still the top 100 albums of 2022, and here we'll go through 25 till whenever I stop for this part of it. Uh, so number 25 is Hellish's "The Dance of the Four Elemental Serpents" out on Dying Victims and Unspeakable Acts, and so the big thing about this record, I guess, is that I get so Critical Defiance was just a different record from that band, and some of those guys are in this band as well as the main guy from Park Park Crest, and this is sort of their black thrash metal project, and basically they had a certain style they developed over the course of the last 8 or 9 years, and one of the guys had to leave the band, the bassist vocalist, and it changed the sound of the band when they brought in a new guy. The new guy is very talented, and not only is he a great vocalist for this type of traditional black thrash metal in the vein of Creator or Demoniac, but he's a great bassist, and this allows the band to sort of basically flaunt this style, which covers both the extreme aggression side of uh, black thrash metal and those level of compositions, while flaring in some progressive thrash metal nuance, and that allows for some really good performative heavy metal songs to appear within this otherwise black thrash metal record, which is very catchy, aggressive, and really driven by the riffs as much as it is the sort of virtuosic elements of their playing, and the effect is just classic. It's brilliant, and just in the same way that Critical Defiance is, it's a little bit modern. It's a little bit their own, but it still has a major influence from the classics, and specifically the late '80s. So, uh, I could talk about a lot of other bands in black thrash metal today, but I couldn't find one that was anything exactly like, or in the spirit of how Hellish has developed, which is not so typical and is especially fine. So I particularly love this album. It came out in December, so it's a little bit more one of the more recent records to hit the top sort of 50 in general. But it was too good to leave off. I do think it might be my favorite thrash metal record of the year, but I'd have to really think about it. And I don't usually think in like genre categories when it comes time to just give the full 100. So 24 is in Circles, I think, second and final full length, Deeper, which they released themselves digitally. And now, normally I would skip over a digital only release because I think, physical format is where an album actually lives and is remembered. But in this case, they pretty much put all their time, money, and energy into this record and decided they were kind of done before they could release it. So it's not that they abandoned a bad thing, though. In fact, they left behind one of the best records of the year, and I think one of the best traditional heavy metal records of the year, due to its particularly fine and emotive songwriting. I think it is deeply introspective in every way, while also being very entertaining in terms of how performative it is. And, you know, the easy comparison to make up front is In Solitude's Sister. But these guys they've developed something of their own here, which is not so necessarily only stuck on post punk in relation to heavy metal. There is some of that, but there's also speed metal in their sound and a little bit of maybe some vestigial interest in extreme metal as well. And what you get is, again, a record unlike anything else released this year. And I think I really appreciate a couple things about this record. The vocalist has really developed his own voice that is like very unique for this project. And I think that the interplay of the rhythm section is especially considered. I think the drumming is fantastic. The songwriting is fantastic. It's the kind of record where so many people overlooked it, kind of like Molten Chain's second full length. So many people overlooked it, but the right people eventually find it, and in hindsight. So hopefully more people pick this one up, and especially if you're interested in unique heavy metal and that kind of thing. Toughness, The Prophetic Dawn on Gods of War Productions makes 23 on my list. And, initially, I think I accidentally reviewed this album a month early before the release date. So it missed, I think I missed it on my best of the month list that year. And I didn't talk about it very much beyond that point because I was just kind of stupidly skipped over it. Uh, as the machine kept turning, as it were. So this was an important one to pick back up and just be like, yeah, I saw too many people saying, well, it's Finnish style death metal from some Polish pillows, but really these guys have they've got another band which plays a different style, which is a little bit more avant garde, and this is maybe even a little bit more buttoned up, but also more adventurous. So I think they're doing something uh, fairly unique with the sort of Demolic and that sort of old school progressive death metal sound out of Europe. The same way that I think Discord were pushing it early on. They haven't gone quite as far with the finesse of it all, but you definitely see this band with a lot of potential already, but also arriving with a lot of value already. Like this is a well considered album that is really worth the time invested in. Now it's very long and involved, and it's knotted up into 1,000 bunches of thorns, But all of that was worth unraveling and picking apart because it's just a cool record and a kind of death metal record I love to come back to and spend time with, especially when I know a lot of people probably just skimmed right past it. So I thought that was well worth one of the more worthy experiences of the year for me. And Kainen Dawn's Lagu uh, is number 22. It's one of my of many good or great releases from Osmos Productions this year, and probably I think my favorite overall. I'm trying to think, um, but anyhow, so this band, it's a French black metal band who were probably known for a little bit more of an avant-garde start, something a little bit orthodox. Uh, they also had some other projects that were maybe a little bit folk black related or pagan black metal related, and this ended up being a very different album for them. I don't know if they were necessarily leading towards it, but just in the same way that Empty delivered a very differently emotional and evocative and atmospheric record this year. So did Kain and Dawn, and this is definitely maybe post-punk influenced a little bit, but not gothic necessarily, not fully gothic. And the value of this record comes in subtle waves. The hooks show up slowly. It's in that way, that's the sort of post-punk element of it, is that there's a somber and slow developing emotional ripple effect that comes through listening to it. And I found it one of the more emotional, like black metal records of the year, and one of the more just memorable listens that it rewarded with every step I took further into it, and had just depth in general. And I know all of these end up being unintentional puns because of the lake theme, but it is a very serious and somber feeling record that is also very lush and just a very nice listen, which, uh, depends what you want out of black metal. I think for this style, it was just perfect. At number 21 is Gut Void's Durance of Lightless Horizons, out on Blood Harvest Records. And so the quick way of saying this is that think of it like the Canadian crypts, right? There's a little bit of demigod in everything they do, and you could say, well, it's kind of a modern take on atmospheric death doom metal in a way, but not when you look closer at it, not when you sit with this record, you find that it's sometimes a riff record and sometimes a catchy sort of finished death metal influenced record. Sometimes it's a death doom record, and it's never all of those things at once, and it never delivers something entirely typical. And the way there's waves of atmospheric interest at the same time as there's knots of involved riffcraft. And I liked the balance they came up with for this debut. It sort of delivered on a lot of the things they were promising in shorter releases and smaller releases leading up to it. Um, I thought maybe the visuals and the theme could sort of come together a little bit better. I didn't understand what the album was about, but I still appreciated the artistry of it. And yeah, I interviewed the band and premiered one of their things a while ago, so I kind of understand where they're coming from. And it's not just a pure old school death metal worship. It's a meeting of minds that have a lot of different interests. So this being the result is kind of rad, and I hope they end up iterating on this quite a bit more, so that we get people begin to see the full breadth of the things that they're interested in putting into Gut Void. So I thought it was great and pretty interesting. Number 20 is another more recent release, Miss Thurming's Med Hamri on Norma Evangelium Diaboli. And this is an Icelandic black metal band who, they're very well known at this point, or they should be, because each release they put out has been different, and each one has been fantastic for different reasons. And it speaks to the versatility and growth of the artist and what they're able to do with what they have at the time in each juncture. And the last record, Al Gleami, was already a fine point that they could have rested on for 10 years. This is sort of a shove ahead. This is them pushing forward after many years of waiting to do something else. They'd had a lot of delays for that last album. So what we get is, like they say, it's the spirit of sort of real heavy metal put behind their music. And that doesn't mean we're getting, Dark Throne album. It means that we're getting a really vital, energetic work from Miss Thurming that I wasn't expecting. There are some very memorable songs on here, very catchy songs that balance out with the more introspective and involved second half of the album. So what we get is, I just found it to be one of the best rides of the year. It's a very repeatable album, and it has a way of tempering overexcitement while still delivering something that is mean and heavy and charged with defiant energy, as black metal should be, or should have. So it, I for sure wanted this higher in the list. I didn't know how far away I was from the hype of just loving this album while I was making the list, because it released on December 16th. But ultimately, my enthusiasm for it hasn't waned, and I've continued to listen to it beyond release. So, at least there's that. Uh, Ataraxy put out one of the finer records of the year in The Last Mirror on Dark Descent Records and Misako and Oho. And again, you'll find a lot of those record labels releases on this list, because they tend to, there's like a long legacy of interest in a lot of the bands that they've retained, and they don't tend to just they don't tend to lose talent, right? So this is an easy number 19 for me. It could have gone a little bit higher, just because this is everything that I liked about the last album from Ataraxy, but pushed into a darker, more death doom oriented place. And it's they're still a classic, almost like Asphyx related death metal band at heart, like they were on earlier records. But now they've taken it to a more atmospheric place, a darker place that I think was just an exceptional record to experience over and over this year. There were a couple. The thing is, there's that Gut Void album I was just talking about, and you'll see there's a couple other albums also similar in this style out this year. And I think that because I'm so interested in the atmospheric and the death doom side of things, that creating a hierarchy, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter where I put them, but it did come down to how often I listened to them and how well I remember them. So this one scored pretty high because it was really good. So at number 18 is Stangar Regal's Na Severe Srdka, however you would pronounce that, on Hexenkade Productions. Basically, this is one of the key members of Mellow Carpetan making a pagan black metal record where it definitely, like so many other black metal artists this past year, shows some vested interest in early 90s black metal. And this is the Oaken pagan black metal side of things. And what I hear when I listen to this record is a little bit of early Falkenbach, some ancient in terms of the use of keyboards, and maybe some Moon Sorrow. You could probably come up with better, you know, uh, insertions in terms of references. Go ahead and do that now, and I'll wait. And otherwise, you'll feel that this is the songwriter from Mellow Carpetan, and that's obviously going to be catchy. It's a little bit, it's not a high fidelity recording. It's not stuffy. It's not overserved, and I think that really makes it kind of a cool thing to pick up and get into. And then you realize, well, this is very catchy and just kind of a pleasure to listen to. It's got this mysterious, arcane quality with their interest in folk mythology and whatnot. So a lot to like about that record. I listened to it like nonstop since March or February, whenever I picked it up. Number 17 is Epitaphs 2 on Aesthetic Death and Gurgling Gore. This was so I've been following this band since I think their demo released on Blood Harvest. It was a pretty interesting demo because they were coming from a place of they spent many years developing a form of kind of dissonant death metal, blackened death metal with apparently some extreme doom metal influences, because their first record, what what a record! Like, holy cow! Their influence from esoteric was more obvious to others than it was to me to start, but you really get it on that first record, and I was just blown away by the band. I think I might have given a perfect score or a full, full recommendation to each of their records thus far, because two is an evolution of one. It's a different thing overall, but it retains the strong personality of the band while showcasing some of their interest in different genres, which might be progressive rock or ambient electronics or, fill in the blank. Uh, I consider their work as not exactly fully on par with the quality of work that like the Ruins of Bevrast do, but it will sate the same fan with the way that they approach it. Obviously, their more involved, modern, like black death metal side is just as much of an acquired taste as their atmospheric side. So there's a lot to really dig into here, and a lot of meaning behind what they do. And this is another band that I interviewed this year, and it's worth reading what they have to say along with this album. So. Uh, Number 16 is Inanna's Void of Unending Depths, which came out on Memento Mori. And this is a band I've been a fan of forever. I think uh, their second record, I must have recommended that to people for like 10 years straight after it came out, because I was such a fan of this certain type of death metal, which is both it's progressive, but it's old school progressive. It's a little bit Immolation, a little bit Morbid Angel. Like there's a lot of really great classic death metal influences going into what they're doing, but it's refined. And at the time, I think they were writing longer, more progressive songs, and they were getting more compared to like Stargazer with what they were doing. Uh, this record takes a little bit more of an interest in what a lot of people describe as angular guitar work or slightly dissonant phrasing, which I usually indicate as something related to here and after era Immolation. And that's probably because it's one of my favorite records. And you'll find a lot of, a record that sounds like that will end up in my favorites of the year in most cases. Um, so it is a little bit different than past releases, and they have a different band that I liked as well that came out in recent years. And I think I was expecting something a little bit more traditional, and this was kind of a surprise because it pulls in some modern influences, changes up some of the pacing, and delivered some really pretty technical songwriting. So I spent a ton of time with this record. It would have been higher up here, but it just kind of it kept getting bumped by other things that were also interesting. So you know, it's when you got hundreds of things to slot around. I think the fact that this kind of record sticks around is still a testament to its quality. I think I would have listened to it more often if I just kind of gave it more time. But I bought the CD and all that, so you um, number 15 is Ruin, or however you'd pronounce that. Revolt, a Chronerie Paysan, and that was, I believe, it was just self-released, or they might have had a cassette tape released by a label. And so this is not any of the bands on Metal Archives, even though the logo and name is similar to a also Quebec-based band. This is a black metal slash post punk band, which is more in the style of like like a Raspberry Bulbs or that kind of thing, where the songwriting and structure of a lot of these songs really does um, center around like late 70s post punk and punk, like seven yeah pre-hardcore punk era songwriting that's a little bit darker. And there are modern equivalents for that, but this is also rooted in black metal, and just all of that doesn't really matter. It's just catchy. It's catchy music. It's dark. It's um, defiant. It has a lot of the qualities that Poison Ruin has. So if you liked that 7-inch that I recommended earlier in the list, this kind of delivers on a similar style and quality of songwriting. Very underrated. A lot of people just didn't give it the time of day, and it's probably because they don't like good music, I would assume, or they don't like catchy music. Uh, so number 14 is Assumption's Hadean Tides, out on Sentient Ruin and Everlasting Spew, and so I like this record for a lot of the same reasons that I do the Ataraxy record I mentioned earlier. It's funereal death doom metal. It I wouldn't necessarily call this a funeral doom metal record, but funeral death doom does work. It is not such a patient experience that I would consider it a funeral doom. It doesn't make you wait for anything. It delivers every moment with a lot of tension and aggression. And in that sense, think of like Inverloch, right? Um, a step beyond the trepidation or the tentativeness of funeral doom and atmospheric death doom in the 90s. So this is a meaningful and strong shift beyond some of their previous work. I felt like their last album was just a little bit sleepy. It wasn't accomplishing much, and it was asking a lot of the listener in terms of just waiting for the space to fill. whereas their EP before that is one of my favorite records in the genre. So, being a fan, not really loving the last album, but still finding it fine work, and then landing on this album, I can kind of let loose on my enthusiasm for this band because they've always been quite good. And any fan of like a disembowelment or something like that should uh, go back through their discography and listen to everything they put out. And I feel like this is sort of the the latest triumph along the road. And the interesting thing they do is they start to introduce some progressive rock influences in their the way they create some of these songs. And you know, obviously, certain ones will stand out more than others because of that. And I'm glad that they experimented a little bit, and that maybe they'll have more of that in the future because I think that's pretty cool. But otherwise, yeah, if you just like Death Doom, this was definitely one of the better records of the year in that style. So at number 13 is Ava Tern's The Alien Facade on Profound Lore Records. And the main, some of the folks in this band were in another band called Flourishing, which I loved. Like, if we're, I mean, if we're talking about a band that added something new to death metal that was thinking beyond Gorguts Obscura, then that was a good example of it. But the band disbanded. That all didn't work out, and now this is a different band, a little bit in some of the same style. I wouldn't say that this is a post-punk or post-hardcore influenced death metal band, but you kind of could see it as a little bit of a spiritual successor as they developed it. Now, I think that they've more interest in various forms of maybe industrial influences and avant-garde black death metal influences that inform the unique rhythmic character of this music in a way that every time I put it on, there's something that clicks in my brain that's so satisfying about the way they develop these rhythms. They hit it the way any death metal band hits a riff, but they develop each rhythm in a meaningful way that they ultimately begin to stand out as songs, and a repeatable experience, which is pretty interesting for such a challenging and aggressive record. So uh, the more I thought about it, the more time I sat with this record, the more I had to, I kept pushing it up the list because it was just sticking in mind better. Yeah, it's also just kind of a cool item to own. I really like the cover art. I like how different it is. Um, it appeals to that portal side of my brain pretty easily. Um, so number 12 is the latest album from Ares Kingdom, In Darkness at Last, out on Nuclear War Now Productions. Now, I didn't cover a lot of Nuclear War Now stuff this year because I didn't receive any of it. And I just can't keep up with all those releases all that well. I probably should, but um, this one I bought as soon as I could because I'm a huge fan of this band and I have been for a very long time. So I already loved their previous album. I felt like a return to all the things that I like about the band, but they kept it a little bit more raw, a little more abrupt. There was basically a little more Hellhammer in everything they were doing, and that is heavily emphasized here, and that 80s death metal, black death metal thing they've always been so good at. In fact, it's a thing they kind of pioneered in a lot of ways in a previous life. So I've already gone on about this record, but yeah, I think it's the kind of thing that you just kind of either get or you don't. And your interest in classic extreme metal and where it all came from will probably really inform whether you appreciate these rhythms and these intense ass performances. I think the vocalist just absolutely just knocked it out of the park on this record more than he has in the past, and I just thought it was awesome. So, number 11, Mortify's Fragments at the Edge of Sorrow, which is out on Chaos Records. This it crept up on me in an interesting way. Like I liked it a lot when I reviewed it. I appreciated it quite a bit. Um, I liked all these references that it kept bringing up in my mind of kind of the 91 to 94 death metal headspace where everything became a little bit more sophisticated, well, but it still kept its gnarly exterior, its wonder for the darkness of the world and, you know, and whatnot. So this Chilean band kind of developed out of an old school, a typical kind of old school revival headspace. And on this record, they explore something completely different. And it's not completely different, but it's refined in a very substantial way. It's kind of the step from Scream Bloody Gore into human, basically. And maybe even a little bit beyond that to independent thought patterns. Uh, Not that they sound like death, they sound a little bit more like later Atrocity or Loud Blast, and maybe even Gorefest, if you will. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, think along the lines of Question, right? It's old school death metal in a semi progressive sense, in with very fine lead guitar work, tons of riffs, and it's such a sweet spot in the stuff that I actually still listen to in terms of 90s death metal that you know, like, yeah, I could go on, but this is basically what I like about death metal, and they've created an album that I do think is quality enough to remember, and not just because it resembled things that I like, you know. Um, I also think the lyrics and the meaning behind the music is pretty interesting too, and that's worth exploring if you pick it up and dig through the booklet and all that. That always counts for something with me, not with everyone. So uh, we'll stop there, and then I'll do the top 10.